I want to start this movie by passing on a fundamental concept that might change the way you think about access. Every object, every form, every button, or checkbox, or label, or text box, everything has a name and a value associated with it inside of Access. And every name or value can be used as an input somewhere else in your database. Really understanding this concept will set you on the path of becoming a true Access rockstar. And here's why. Access objects, that is tables, forms, queries, reports, etc., they're all presented by the interface as individual components of your database. But in reality, it's the interaction and interconnections between the objects that allow your database to do some pretty amazing things. In the previous movie, we looked at how we can provide our end users with a pop-up dialog box to define some query parameters. Let's take that a step further and see how we can define those same parameters using form controls. Let's go ahead and create a new query here. I'm going to start with Create tab and go to Query Design. In this case, I want to define a query that finds customers based off of the state that they live in. I'll double-click on the Customers table to add it to the query design, and then I'll close the Show Table window. Here I'm going to add first name and last name to the grid, and I'll scroll down and add state. Now let's go ahead and scroll this up a little bit just so it's higher on the screen. And now we can go through and add in a criteria. We saw previously that I could hard-code a criteria. For instance, if I type AZ, every time I run this query, it's going to find the customers that live in Arizona. We also saw that if I put in square brackets, enter a state, every time I run this query, it'll ask me for the state that I want with a parameter box, like this one. Go ahead and press cancel. Instead, what I want to do is get the state from a form that we're about to build. So for right now, let's go ahead and blank out this criteria and save the query. I'm going to call this Customer Lookup Query. That'll add it down here to the navigation pane. Now let's go ahead and create a form to capture the state that we're interested in. I'm going to go to the Create tab and you start a new form in Design View. Let's go ahead and immediately save this form. I'll press the Save icon and call this Customer Lookup Form. Now I need to add a text box to capture input from my end users. I'll come over here on the Design tab of the ribbon. In the Controls group, we'll add this one here, which is a text box. I'll click down here, and then I'll change the label by double-clicking on it and saying Enter a State. Next, I want to have a button that'll run my query. This button right here with the 4 X's on it is our button control. I'll click it and then add a button down below. When the command button wizard starts up, we're going to choose Miscellaneous, run a query, and then press Next. The query that we want to run is called the Customer Lookup Query, the one we just built. I'll select it from the list and press Next. Finally, what do we want our button to say? I'm going to change this option to text that says Run Query. Go ahead and say Next, and then Finish. Now we have a text box that our end users can type in, and a button that'll run the query. Now all I need to do is make sure that I know what the name of this text box is so that we can refer to it in the query. I'll select it, then open up the property sheet, and then I'm going to go to the Other tab. Here is a property for name. I'm going to change it from text0 to txt state lookup. Now I know the name of this text entry box, and I know the name of the form that it lives on. Let's go ahead and save this form one more time. I'll press the Save icon, and we'll switch into Form View. Now I have the box that says Enter a State, and a button that'll run the query. So let's go into the query and finish this up. I'll switch my tab over here to the Customer Lookup Query, and then in the criteria, instead of hard-coding it or putting in the parameter request, we'll put in a reference to that state lookup text box that we just created. To do that, I'm going to right-click and go open the Zoom box. That'll give me more room to type. I'm also going to change the font size slightly, up to 12 points. Let's go ahead and say OK, and then I can start typing. The way that I refer to that object on the form is that I first define what group it's in. So I'm going to open up a square bracket and type in Forms. After I type in the closing square bracket around Forms, I'm going to type in an exclamation mark. That tells me that we're going inside of the Forms group. Inside the Forms group, we're going to look for a form called Customer Lookup Form. So again, inside of square brackets, I'm going to type in Customer Lookup Form. After that, we're going to look on the Customer Lookup Form for an object called Text State Lookup. So once again, I'll separate it with an exclamation mark, and then I'll type in a square bracket, txt state lookup. Finally, I'll close it with a closing square bracket. So this is going to work just like a file path does on your computer. Instead of looking on the C drive and the users folder and then your username, we're going to be looking here in the Forms group for a form named Customer Lookup Form, and then within that, we're going to find an object called Text State Lookup. Let's go ahead and say OK. It puts the reference to the criteria down here in this line. Now all I need to do is go into my form, here, type in a state, and run the query. When it runs, it shows me all the customers in the state of Arizona. Let's go ahead and switch back to the form. I'll type in a different state, AK for Alaska, and run the query again. This time it doesn't look like it updates because the query was already open. So let's go ahead and fix that. I'm going to go into the form. I'm going to right-click and go into Design View. I'll select the button. I'll go over to the Event tab, and the on-click event for this particular button is an embedded macro. I just need to add one step to this macro. I'll press the Build button over here on the far right, and then come down here where it says Add New Action. I'm going to type in the new action of requery. I don't need to fill out any other control names, so let's just go ahead and close the macro, save the changes, and then switch my form back to Form View here. Now I can run this query over and over again. So I'll type in AK for Alaska, run the query, and it shows me my customers in the state of Alaska. If I switch back to the form, and I type in MO for Missouri, we'll run the query, and it shows me all the customers in the state of Missouri. Now, this wasn't meant to be an all-inclusive look at creating amazing forms, but I hope that this example has given you a little taste of the types of user interface tools that are at your disposal within Access. By combining what we already know about creating robust queries with some additional insight into the larger framework of Microsoft Access databases, my goal is to get you thinking about your own projects, and hopefully get you excited about applying these tools to your own database needs.